God of Abraham and Sarah, you called them to journey into the unknown. You guided them through hardships along the way. You invited trust and demanded obedience. You made and kept promises. God of our lives, in Jesus Christ, you call us to a journey of faith. You promise to guide our steps and sustain our discipleship. It takes a lot to get us moving, oh God. Speak through these ancient stories so that we can feel faith's excitement and receive your promise with anticipation. We pray this in the name of Jesus. We trust him. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. So before we dig into we're on lesson number 4, and or discovery number 4. Before we kind of dig into it, I'll see if there's any housekeeping things that we need to go over. I will mention one as a reminder that we will not have study here until, gosh, it's going to be into November, right? If I have that correct from our calendar. I'm leaving for Israel and Palestine next week. A week from today, I'll be heading over to Seattle, and so we'll be back again. I think it's that first Wednesday in November. So we'll have a little bit of a break here. Just kind of reminder about that. But any questions, just kind of overall, for as far as the studies are concerned, or any issues accessing materials? Anything? Okay.
Everybody can see her.
Well, yeah, you want to see her live? Okay, yeah. Here,
Okay.
hang on.
Here's
Oh, what a beautiful puppy.
doing really well. She's super cute. I am going to sit with her in her pen, which we have dubbed Alice's Palace. And so I'll be on the floor for much of the study. So
Is she a corgi?
yes.
Right. So, okay.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, and an interesting little side part about the whole story, and then we'll kind of go into it here. Her parents are from Iowa, and I'd heard this talking to the breeder beforehand, and I didn't really make much of it until I was there, and I was asking the breeder, so just out of curiosity, where in Iowa did you get her parents? And she mentioned this town in Iowa, which you've never heard of or anything, and I wouldn't have, except that my friend Fritz had pastored a church in that town. So he didn't. I've asked him. He doesn't know the breeder, but I'm sure he knows somebody that does. This little town, and how many corgi breeders could they have? So
Right.
but
That is great and beautiful little dog. Congratulations.
thanks. All right. Well, tonight, as the story continues, we're looking at God's promise and God's covenant with Abram and Sarai. There's a lot of ground that we've kind of covered in terms of names and some of the stories, some good old stories from Sunday school, of course. And it's interesting, as I'm looking at some of these things, I'm recognizing some names and some places that I hope to be seeing here in the next couple of weeks. So I'll be taking pictures and things of that, and I think we'll have a blog and so maybe a Facebook page that'll be available for people to view. We'll get that on our church Facebook page. So if you want to see things, from me and others, check out either through our church Facebook page or mine and that kind of thing. So, all right. Well, let's take a look at our passages here, beginning with Genesis 12. And, somebody could take a look on page 32 and read for us those overarching questions that we have. Maybe that whole section there, the search begins.
By reading through the section above, you have discovered that there are many people associated with the promise. Make an effort to understand their relationships. If you have a Bible with added comments, build on them as you read these passages and make notes that will help you retell the story of the promise. Be guided by these questions in your reading. What promises did God make to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How did God's covenant change their lives? What significance for succeeding generations did God's promise have?
Okay. Thank you, V. So would somebody like to share their notes from Genesis 12? Wayne, you go ahead and unmute yourself.
If Abraham would move, right, then he would be blessed and protected and given land and given tons of offspring.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting that Abraham's father was already headed the direction of Canaan, but he stopped before he got there. So the idea of going to Canaan wasn't a brand new idea for Abraham.
There was a note in the leader's guide talking about, I'm going to pull this up at least so I can read a portion of it for you. But talking about I think the significance of God choosing Abraham over maybe the other people who were in the land. So let's see. I have the wrong note there. So this is from a book called Understanding the Old Testament by Bernard Anderson. It's interesting, in his leader's guide, he mentions that it was a text from his biblical studies when he was a student in seminary. And this was all written about 10 years ago, or revised about 10 years ago. Well, when I was in seminary, that was the book that we used. It's out of print now, so I'm kind of curious as to what they do use. But he says that he writes this: the ancestral religion also expressed faith in the God who makes promises and guides into the future, like a shepherd leading a flock. This nomadic faith differed markedly from the religions of sedentary peoples of the Fertile Crescent, and we'll see this more as we continue in these discoveries. Religions that bound a cult to a sacred location. In Canaan, a sanctuary like the one at Bethel was regarded as the very gate of heaven, where the deity became manifest in a special way. We know from the book of Genesis that Israel's ancestors visited these ancient Canaanite places like Shechem and Bethel and Beersheba, but these visits were part of an itinerant lifestyle. The God of the ancestors was not bound to a place. Instead, the shepherding deity uprooted Abraham from his homeland, leading him and his descendants along new paths to new places, always holding before them the promise of land and posterity. So the idea of God not bound to a place, and we'll see some of these themes, like with the tabernacle and later in the Exodus and so on, really kind of stood out.
For me, one of the things I noticed is that, each place that Abraham stopped, he always built an altar.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that about? And what did they do at that altar?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, worshipped, I think, or made sacrifice. I wonder if in some way that marked territory a little bit, place where he'd been. That's pretty consistent in the Old Testament. Whenever something important happens, they would make like an Ebenezer or stone pillar, of some sort, to mark an event. You can imagine in a barren land that a pile of stones could stand out, on some level to mark your way. Tom, did you have something you want to add? Tom Allen? Oh, okay, sorry. Don't forget, if you want to chime in, a lot of you are muted, so which is fine, but you have to unmute when you want to share. Any other observations from that Genesis 12 passage?
I was just wondering about the blessing.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually think of blessing as some specific outcome, something is done on our behalf. And certainly that happened for Abram. But I didn't know if there was anything more to it. Did it like refer to the presence of God in his life even, do you think? Or leadership, or was it just stuff? God did things for him in response to his promise.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of a faith component really yet, is there? I mean there is. I should back up, but not in terms of like they're not developing a ritual for different kinds of sacrifices or what worship would look like. It's sort of he's almost ad hoc or something.
God speaks to Abraham, tells him to do something, and Abraham follows the order. He is willing to pick up his belongings, his family, and go where God tells him to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's being blessed for.
Well, it also says, that Abraham will be a blessing to others. And then any who curse him are going to be cursed. So God's going to protect him.
Let's take a look at Genesis 16 and the story of Hagar and Ishmael.
I was just going to make one other comment. I was muted earlier and I didn't realize it. But as far as the question of why he was building these things, one of the thoughts that I had was back then there were not many landmarks, and particularly in that kind of territory. And so for travelers to have these landmarks being established could have been very important, as well as safe havens, because there was a lot of looting and stuff among travelers as well.
If I may, I have another thought on the altar thing. We today don't leave memorials, but we take memorials. We take photographs wherever we go. And I know in my spiritual life there are certain markers I have. There's a Bible that I associate with this specific time in my life. There's a bookmark that a kid made that had to do with the Sunday school class, and we all leave markers, or we either leave them or we take them. And we as modern people photograph everything. If we're ever going back and looking at markers and remembering, and so I'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. You think of a place that's got lots of markers, and that's a cemetery. I mean, we definitely use markers to indicate places that are places we want to remember.
Well, just our homes are markers. I mean, not all societies have had residential areas as established as what we have today.
Who can remind us who was Hagar?
That was,
Sorry, slave.
Slave. Yeah. Yeah. Sarah's slave. And there's a note, I think, in preparing for the search, talking about what she did in terms of offering her to Abraham to bear a child was, it's all those things really weird to us, but was kind of an acceptable practice then. I mean, just like owning people, for instance, and what are some takeaways, some notes from that experience here with Hagar and Ishmael? Anybody want to share?
For me, it was, Sarah willingly gave her and then went, whoa, wait a minute, that was a bad idea.
Uh-huh.
At least that's the way I interpreted it.
Yeah, and look,
Oh.
Becca was noting that she looked on Hagar with disdain.
Well,
Yeah.
Hagar looked on Sarah.
Or the other way around, sorry,
Yeah.
Hagar.
Yeah.
Sarah,
Both.
yeah.
Really both.
Probably mutual, right?
yeah, probably mutual. Yeah.
And anything else that you noted from this story?
I thought it was interesting that God promised Hagar something very similar to what Abram was promised. All these descendants, and her son would have all these descendants. If she was to go back to Sherry and put up with the abuse, and she would be the promise of a great nation coming from her as well.
Mm-hmm.
I got from that, though, that so Hagar runs away and God sends her back, but then punishes Ishmael for, at least what I was getting out of it was punishing Ishmael because his mom said, I'm out of here for a little bit.
Is that because it said that he'll be a wild ass of a man? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
I too found that interesting that Ishmael would, or through Hagar, that his offspring would be themselves a great multitude and so on. And of course, what major religion traces back through Ishmael to Abraham? Islam, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
So we can start to see, the intricacies, like one of the places that I think we're going to see in Israel, or actually in Palestine, is Rachel's tomb. And it's a site, just like on the Temple Mount in Israel, or in Jerusalem rather, a site that is revered by Jews and Muslims. And of course, the Temple Mount, revered by Jews and Muslims and Christians alike. But you see these roots that go back to this place and these people. So if we talk about blessings and things that have carried forward, we see that today. And part of the mandate, or the mandate, but like settlements that are taking place in the West Bank, Jewish settlements that are springing up in the West Bank. I was talking to a friend who lived there, and she was saying that, I said, what's the rationale for that? And they said, well, they go back to the Bible, and that was the land that God had promised. So that, these promises and things have a very, contemporary meaning in our kind of geopolitical world today. So how about Genesis 17, 1 through 27? Does it feel kind of like we've read this before in a way, God's covenant with Abraham?
Well, it's reinforcement.
Okay.
But
More detail.
also, and here is where his name is changed to Abraham, and he, is said he will be the father of many nations. And I think this is interesting. It's not just before in Genesis 12 is I will make you a great nation, and here it says he'll make him the father of many nations. And I thought that was also interesting with Hagar and Ishmael, Hagar's descendants will be too numerous to count. And again, this will be, a great nation. And so we're not talking about, one country, we're talking about all these different countries coming from this lineage.
Yeah, I noted we can skip ahead to Genesis 25, the story of the birth of Jacob and Esau. And let me pull this up here. And
So before we go on,
well, I just want to point this out. We'll go.
Okay.
We'll go right back.
Okay.
But in 25:19, let's see here. In verse, what would this be? 23. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger, and so on. So, you wonder how many nations are in, does the covenant in some fashion apply to these other nations on, maybe not the exact same level, but that was a question that kind of came up when we're talking about many nations. But Carrie, you had something.
So the way I read 17:1 through 27, it said God changed his name, but told Abraham that he needs to be blameless. So what's that blameless? Because I'm looking at it and I'm thinking he's not necessarily blameless. So it seemed like there was a qualifier there, but then didn't really use the qualifier against him.
Yeah, and we didn't read the entire narrative here. We kind of jumped around a bunch, but go back to Genesis 12 and like verse 10 and following. This is right after God gives Abraham this promise, and you'll note a theme here as well. Somebody want to read verse, let's see, maybe 10 through 16. Oh, actually through 17.
I will. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive, thanks to you. When Abraham entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. The Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels.
And then the clincher in verse 17.
Okay. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abraham.
Yeah.
Abram.
So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me?
Yeah.
Why did you not tell me that she was your wife?
Yeah.
And Becca's pointing me to chapter 20 as well. Yeah, where you see the same kind of thing happening again. So, oh, she's his half sister. Yeah.
Yeah, she is.
So, but so is Abraham is he sort of living up or worthy to his end of this great covenant, you think?
He sounds kind of like the shrewd steward to me.
Yeah.
Or else
Yeah,
very insecure.
And we'll see this with everybody else in this line of covenant. How do we describe these, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, in a general sense? How would we describe some of these folks, Joseph?
They're still flawed people.
Yeah.
They are living more or less the life that they would have been expected to live without the contact with God. Maybe not so much, but they still have their faults.
Well, maybe they're still trying to understand what it is to be blessed.
But they were in
Well,
relationship with God. And then in this Genesis 17 text, there becomes the sign of the covenant. So it's not just you're going to be a great nation, you're going to be blessed and everything. There will be a physical sign. And the sign of the covenant here is circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
All must be circumcised.
You have to realize these people don't have very much law yet. We certainly haven't seen the Ten Commandments. What does it mean to follow God?
Right. But I think, when we talk about being selfish, as Becca's whispering in my ear, that they're selfish, they're petty, they're deceivers, right? And I don't think, you need a law per se to know that that lying is okay, right? I think C.S. Lewis talks about that in was it in Mere Christianity? Maybe Todd's nodding. Yeah, where kind of as a universal sort of thing, that there's no culture that in the world that lifts up lying, and deceit as something of virtue. So
Right.
when we talk about promises and covenant, who is it that how does this covenant get honored?
Right. I mean, it's just in verse 1, it says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. That's what you got to do. And I look at it and I'm like, he never did that part of it.
Yeah.
Unless the blameless is something that I don't understand.
Right.
So it's not, when I look at that, it's not on the people to keep the covenant. God's like, I'm not even gonna, I can't hold you guys to this.
I don't think Abram or Abraham are any different than us. We're chosen.
Right.
And that's the qualifier we have that makes all the difference.
And in the way God talks to us, he says, be holy as I am holy. Here he's telling you to be blameless, be holy as I'm holy. And part of that holy was being set apart for God and his purposes.
Did Paul Mattson, did you have something you wanted to?
No.
Okay. All right.
No. I was just, how sometimes you see family patterns from generation to generation and socially things just become acceptable because the parents before them did it. They really need to stop picking favorite wives and children. It is really, really dangerous. Like so many times you're like, I know that your children are all different, but it doesn't mean you have to pick a favorite and then set them up on a pedestal. Like we can see this throughout royalty and history too. But it's just not a good idea. Especially when you have two wives. That's a really bad idea.
The idea of the covenant and what are the, sort of the boundaries of the covenant. And we'll see this in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament, the idea of what kind of lines do the people have to draw between, themselves and their faith, their practices versus like the people of the land. and so on. The ideas about intermarrying and things. That's a constant kind of a theme in the Old Testament. Well, even into the New Testament too, when we talk about Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians and so on. But we see hints of a covenant that's made with Abraham, but also the idea that they are blessed to be a blessing, for that the world, the earth is going to be blessed through them. There's that tension. Where are those walls, where are those boundaries, and where do they go across? And in the Genesis 17, God's covenant with Abraham, of course, what's the sign of the covenant that the men are to do? Circumcision. But who's to be circumcised?
All males.
Okay.
Slaves.
Yeah, includes slaves and any foreigners living in their land.
Yeah.
Which I thought was which was interesting.
One thing I would maybe connect with being blameless, they were to only worship God, not any idols, and Abraham came out of a idol worshiping family. And we see this a lot, that there were problems when somebody hid the idols and kept them and stuff. So maybe that's the real connection, is being faithful to the one God.
Well, and even as we saw from last week, that God placing God's mark on on Cain, and right, that so who's to say whom God is going to bless or protect, and well, we won't have time to go through all of these other readings, but are there ones that anyone wants to take a look at and either share or hear notes from other people? Are there any other ones from what we looked at?
Well, since we've been talking about it, I'm wondering if Genesis 22, where Abraham is faithful, would be a good one to look at.
Okay. What kind of notes do you have there? That of course was the story of the near sacrifice of Isaac.
Right. I haven't really gotten a chance to make notes, but just having read through it, or actually skimming through it, because it's a common Sunday school story even.
Yeah.
I think the thing that stood out to me was in the very beginning of the chapter, where God tested Abraham. So, there was even some question in God's mind as far as Abraham's commitment from past performance, evidently.
There very specifically are the words about Isaac being your only son who you love. And, there's a resonance between that and God and Jesus, that Jesus' sacrifice as God's only son.
Well, when Isaac asked, well, where's the sacrifice? And Abram said, God will provide.
I think that was a turning point right there. That was kind of proof of what God was looking for.
Yeah. Is anyone else bothered by this whole story? Yeah, I've preached on it I don't know, a couple times probably, but that's a really hard one to. It's vivid and memorable on certain levels, but if you dig into it, it's like, why would God do this in the first place? And there's no real answer that I have found satisfactory to that, but
God knew what the outcome was going to be. he knew he was going to provide.
Yeah.
No, there's some kind of disturbing stuff with that parallels, but I was thinking about it with Joseph too, the story of Joseph. I mean, you think about that whole stream of events. We have a favorite son, we have jealousy, we have deceit, abduction, slavery. And we'd all look at that stuff and say, that's unjust. And we'd be all over it, right? But it seems like the ends somehow justify the means, which makes me wonder if God's sense of justice is a little bit different or far-reaching, maybe, than the kind of immediate sort of thing we see as perhaps injustice. I don't know. It's given me pause here.
For me, the things that are standing out the most are, maybe I'm way off, or maybe it's so obvious, I don't know, but it seems like we're reading about how total consecration to the Lord's covenant is required in order to be blessed. And that could be very different from the way we see now, that we're all blessed by God's grace, right? And so this is a story about what is required by God in order to be okay with God.
Yeah, I think oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I wonder though, going back to Wayne real quick, like if things had panned out differently, God would have still used it the same way, right? So I don't think it can allow us to say injustice is okay, because God will end up making it work out. But he's able to take flawed situations and make things go the direction he wants to go, even though people screwed things up in the process. So maybe there's an element of that, and not like every single bit of that. I mean, I don't know, maybe some of that was planned out, but maybe A, B, C, and D weren't, but getting to F was the whole point, right?
Some things are probably just kind of mysteries, and again, these are the some of the foundational stories in the Bible. But these are the kinds of things that we look back and where people say they want to say that the God of the Old Testament is not the same as the God of the New Testament, and so. Vicki, was there something else you wanted to get to, by the way?
No, not really. I'm just thinking, I guess I'm just thinking that there was a different view of the way God worked in people's lives then than maybe lots of us have now. Mm-hmm. And I'm also just thinking a lot that these stories were written down long, long after the events occurred. And it's interesting to me always, like, why are certain things included in the stories that were written and passed on and other things not included? And these are the things that were included because they have some significance, either for us now or people back then, or both, right?
Go ahead, Ardith.
It seems to me like with these origin stories, as Vicki said, that were written down so much later, that it's more about who God is than these people. I mean, the history's there, but that the stories that are recorded help us understand who God is and his commitment to the promises and the covenants that he made that go down to today.
And if nothing else, we do see, as much as Abram was kind of slimy, when he went down to Egypt, we do see another side here where, as cruel as it might sound, he is being faithful, right? I mean, back to really where we started. So
I have a thought about this one. And it just takes me to the hearing of other people's faith stories. And Matt gave us the gave us that commission, go out, share your stories just a few weeks back. And sometimes when I hear the stories of other Christians, and sometimes the way that I judge the way they see God or work with God or tell or feel that God is, or they say that God is telling them to do such and such, etc. And I'm thinking to myself, what? God wouldn't, that's not how God interacts with people, but I don't say that, I just listen to their stories and everything. But sometimes I'm thinking, oh, that's wacko. But maybe there's an element of truth in that, that we aren't there to judge other people's interactions with God.
Yep, who's to say? Any other ones that you have? Well, maybe we can go to the questions that you might have. Any questions that came up from these readings that might point us back to looking at any of these other ones? But
Well, there were a couple of times when, like, in Genesis 18 and 21, the Lord was speaking directly, like the Lord was there speaking directly to Sarah and Abraham. And I'm like, wow, they were, how could that be? I thought that was curious.
Well, and Jacob wrestling.
Right. With God.
God. How cool is that?
So with the wrestling one, I was like, is what we have here a kind of fantastical account of kind of justifying the strength and worthiness of this line of people to be God's chosen people? Is that what that story is about? Or is it meant to be more literal? Like, I don't know.
It's hard to say, exactly. It could probably fit some different themes. One theme is that, we didn't read into it, but this is where, Jacob is going to face Esau, right? And, after he cheated Esau out of his birthright and everything. So he was not expecting a happy reunion. So that's why he sent all of his, people on ahead of him and everything. And he's stewing over this the night before and, wrestles with God and it kind of reaffirms God's kind of, watch over him. And indeed they meet and, Esau doesn't kill him like he thought would happen. So that, there are probably there's some different themes that kind of show up in here. And of course, what's the one of the biggest ones in here? What name does he get?
Israel.
Israel. Where have we heard Israel? Where are we going to hear Israel? Does that sound familiar? Anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Nation of people.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the nation of Israel and so on. And I think he does a good job, the author, pointing out that when we look at Israel, and that's worth going back to look at, the name Israel depends on the context. Are we talking about the person? We're talking about the nation of Israel, and then, post divided monarchy, then which one are we talking about? Because Israel kind of fades away and it's really about Judah later on. So anyway, just, you don't have to remember all that stuff now, but you'll be reminded when we go back to it later on and you see that. There's a common theme here of people getting new names, and maybe we'll pause and look at your questions and take a look on 36. And we're asked to take a look at our footnotes in our Bibles and write down the name or what the word means in our footnotes. And I would venture that depending on the Bible translation we're using, we might have different footnotes. So maybe we can kind of share some different ones that we come up with or we've been given So Ishmael, what's that mean?
God hears,
God hears,
or he hears, or he hears,
or he hears.
God hears.
In the Torah, it's suffering or misery.
Yeah, is that what? That's what they have as a translation for that?
Well, in the NIV, it said misery, but in the Torah, it said suffering.
Huh.
But for God hears for Ishmael?
For Ishmael, yeah. Genesis 16:11.
Yeah.
Wow, that one's really different.
For an interpretation of this, yeah.
Okay. Any other translations of Ishmael? God hears. Well, Abraham, we're given this, but maybe in your footnotes you notice something. Anybody have a different name for Abraham?
I guess father.
Okay.
Ancestor. Yeah.
How about Isaac?
He laughs.
He laughs. Any other translations there? Esau.
Harry.
And red.
Harry, red.
Red, yeah, red.
Yeah.
And also Edom, right?
He was red. Red.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, but Edom and Esau, I mean, you kind of get a little bit of a cross, I don't know, cross pollination or something like that. Jacob.
Heel.
Heel.
Grasps the heel.
Grasps the heel or takes the heel.
Or he deceives.
Deceives.
The plant. Take
The
the place
plant.
of-
Yeah.
Torah for Jacob. God protect.
And who does Jacob later become?
Israel.
Israel.
Israel, right. And of course, Israel means, skipping down to that bottom one,
He struggles with God.
struggles with God, or the one who strives with God,
Mhm.
the others. Isn't that an interesting name? It's not Israel is faithful or something. It's the one who strives with God.
There's an interesting comment here in mine that says the name Jacob became proverbial for the unsavory quality of deceptiveness.
Mhm. Who is it that Jesus says, truly, there's no man in all of something with no deceit or something like that? Does that ring any bells from the New Testament?
Nathaniel, wasn't it? A man
Nathaniel?
without guile?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, and John. And now that we know Jacob and everything, there's definitely kind of an interplay here that, almost like a wordplay, throughout in all of Israel, there's one, without deceit, without any like Jacob in him, if you will. So kind of interesting. But it's an interesting name, to begin with, that, by nature, they're people that struggle with God, and we certainly will see that. as well.
I read years ago, and I don't remember where, but that the 5 patriarchs of Judaism, whichever, what they had in common was that I think the term was, shook their fist in the face of God. In other words, they took God on.
And then Bethel, what does that mean?
Place of God.
Yeah, place of God, or house of God.
No, I think that's a direct translation. El would have been Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
Beth is house of.
Yep. So Bethlehem means, anybody know what that is? It's not in here. Extra credit. House of bread.
Oh.
Yeah. And then Joseph, perhaps an apt name.
May he add.
Yeah. And it referred to him adding to their family, but also as, one overseeing Pharaoh's storehouses and things. He would have certainly had known how to add and keep track of things.
Yeah, my translation has taken away.
Oh, he is taken away, huh? Okay. Interesting. Others?
When we have all of these names, because I know, and even today when like their baby something, like, oh, that name means whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, the names had to be coming from something or attached to something. So you kind of wonder, were these names coming from a word, or because of who they were, was there a meaning attached to it later? Like at some point, there's not a history to go back to, right? So, also I found it very interesting. None of the women are listed in here, but why in the world are Leah and Rachel named, Leah and Rachel named after animal terms?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, cow eyes and
you.
Yeah.
Todd, why did you do that, your daughter?
You've seen Leah's eyes,
Yeah.
Any other questions, overarching questions from your readings? Anything kind of jump out to you?
This is from last week. I wasn't here last week, but I did do the lesson, and I thought it was curious that I think it was in Genesis 16. And it was that about Noah. Anyway, the sons of God saw the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married them. But anyway, the men were the sons of God, and the women were the daughters of humans. And it kind of goes back to the cow eyes and the you eyes. It's kind of derogatory to call them the sons of God, and they married the daughters of humans. And we're
Well, does that
It's the ring of mythology.
We weren't going to touch that. That
back
one was
to the story of Adam and Eve, though, because Adam was created by God and then Eve was taken from him. When
What's
she
that
was
again?
created. What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at something. I missed that.
I was just saying, suggesting maybe the thought goes back to Adam and Eve, where Adam was created by God from the earth, but Eve was taken from his side.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that bone of bone, flesh of flesh was maybe more of a saying or something, perhaps.
Especially back then when they were so much closer to, that was one of their only references.
I want to back up to a second. Becca sent me a text here about Ishmael that I want to share with you. I'm assuming you want me to share, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Either way.
So this article says the name Ishmael is composed of three parts. Shema. I guess we looked at the Shema, right? In the very first one, Shema Yisrael. So it's got Shema. Remember the three, they have a three-letter root. Shema and El, which we mentioned. And the word Shema is a verb literally meaning to listen, but it can also mean to obey, or more correctly, to respond. This word in the title of the Shema, the Jewish affirmation of faith, as found in Deuteronomy 6:4, states Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, or as it is normally translated, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The use of the word Shema in this verse is stating hear and respond to Yahweh. When the letter El is prefixed to a verb, it identifies the subject of the verb as the third person, masculine and singular, or he. Therefore, the phrase would mean he listens. Anyway, so have a deeper dive.
Okay, so does that mean that the name means more that Ishmael is one who listens to God? Or does it mean that God listens to Ishmael?
Yeah, that's a good point. In the context of what would you think from the context of what the story came from? What would you say?
God listened to Hagar.
God
Yeah,
listened to Hagar.
God listened to Ishmael when he was crying.
Yeah.
They recognized her suffering.
And by the way, who is Joseph sold to? It's kind of confusing because they talk about Midianites and Ishmaelites. Because it says Midianites found him, Ishmaelites bought him, but then it was Midianites that sold him to Pharaoh, or in Egypt rather. But those are both descendants of Abraham too. So they would have been like second or third cousins. Can you imagine?
Big family.
Family. Yeah.
Oh.
So that goes back to, maybe this is just a super obvious question. It's obviously a big honor or something that people want to have many descendants. Like there's a reason that that's a thing that they view as a blessing, right? Is it just about having numbers and therefore having some sense of power in the world around you? Or because there's a certain point, there have come many famines and more mouths to feed or more difficult to feed when there is famine. So there's a certain point where, I don't know. I just kind of interesting to me that it's a very big thing. And it's quoted kind of throughout scripture that they just keep multiplying and taking over the world. So I just wonder, is it just an occupier kind of thing, or I don't know, historically, why is that such a big deal?
Yeah, Becca was saying because so many kids died, that could certainly be part of it. But I think there's probably something to do with numbers and conquest and the like as well.
What about we were asked to be fruitful and multiply?
Oh, okay.
And so that was part of what we were called to do.
Right.
Good.
I think esoterically, it's the search for the eternal.
How's that?
Well, I mean, your seed goes on and on and on.
Right.
And so eternal may not be the right word, but
I see what you mean though, and the posterity.
Posterity, yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's some of that today even.
Sure.
Yeah.
My brother was angry. I think he was angry at God, but he was angry, period, because my nephew was gay. And he says, that's the end of the family name. There'd be no more Scotts. So I mean, he loved my nephew, no end, always did. But there would be no more Scots as far as he was concerned.
There's also a freedom of intermarrying early on. Obviously, there's a necessity from a gene pool standpoint to do that, but there's a lot of these characters married outside Israel, whereas later on, there's very much like Israel is Israel and stay away and don't mix with the people outside. So it's just kind of interesting that early on here, there isn't that sense of separation from the world around them yet.
Good point. What do you think? I had a note in one of the questions I had, I touched on it earlier, is Esau and Edomites and so on, are they in some fashion children of the covenant?
I think so.
You want to say more about that, Arna? Anyone?
Ardith, you're muted, Ardith.
That's okay. I don't really have anything to say. Sorry.
Well, is there one covenant, or it sounded to me like there were maybe several made with different branches? I don't know if the one with, was it Esau, you said? Was that reciprocal? Was he supposed to do something?
Well, yeah, with Esau wasn't really a covenant per se, but there was, that he would be a nation.
Right. So God made a promise, but it wasn't a reciprocal thing where he was supposed to do something back. So maybe that wasn't a covenant.
Yeah, I don't know. It might just have been a statement, but it does suggest, again, if we look at, offspring and everything, that offspring and blessing and so on, that there's a correlation, between whether we call it a covenant exactly or not, but it's a blessing from God. And, and I think one of the things we might just think about is when God is going to bless the world through Abraham and his descendants, what does God mean? And, it's like, it's one thing if, in a family, one sibling gets the inheritance, the other one, misses out or something like that. But, you're talking about this, blessing from God. Does God's favor, is it excluding all the others? We looked at the choosing David, for instance. Well, David is chosen who would be king by God, but David has brothers. They are still people of the covenant. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's just a question. I don't have any particular answer, but it just was something that stood out to me. This reading through. How about discoveries? Any discoveries that you made along the way? Something that new that popped out and recalled from Sunday school or what have you?
If we can go back for just a moment on the question of Esau.
Sure.
Esau gave up his birthright to Jacob. And so is that where you're getting your question from?
No, not necessarily. It was earlier before, when Rebecca's pregnant and God says that she has two nations within her.
Right.
So obviously the covenant goes through one child and not both of them, but the idea that there were two nations kind of make me wonder,
Sounds like a kind of question that requires a lot of study to really figure it out.
And didn't Esau marry Ishmael's daughter?
Yeah, was that right?
Yeah.
Something
So that
like
would be, the kind of the Arab nation.
Maybe. Yeah.
But when women married in, did they assume the nationality of their spouse?
Maybe.
I mean, just as far as like their line beyond them would be considered, like Joseph married someone who was Egyptian, but Joseph's offspring would be considered part of Israel, not Egyptian necessarily.
Yeah, although Becca points out that, like Judaism is carried on through the mother.
Yeah.
So not 100% sure.
As Christians, we think about Abraham blessing many descendants in the whole world. We kind of think of that in light of Christ coming and so forth. But if we think of all Abraham's descendants as a means of blessing the world, then you kind of have to look at the blessing possibly through Islam. I don't know.
And
I think you ask about a discovery. I love the statement by Hagar. I'd forgotten about it if I ever even do it. Too, after her encounter with God, reflects, I have seen him who sees me. I don't know, I just kind of love that. Kind of a penetrating, transparent, honest encounter.
Yeah.
I guess I was reminded of some of the lyrics. I think there's a couple songs, about we're all sons of Abraham. Uniting different cultures and ethnic groups.
Yeah.
Father Abraham had many sons. Like those things.
I guess they all came through Noah.
Yeah, in the context of, for me personally, preparing for this trip to Israel and Palestine, it does, make me think about how possible and yet how difficult it is that we could find peace among, say, Jews and Christians and Muslims through a common ancestry. And if we look at these stories, even just because people are related doesn't mean they're going to treat. Fights are always worse among family, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because you know just how to really hurt somebody in your family. And so it feels like there's a possibility for, some hope, and yet this great divide that comes from closeness that remains an obstacle.
Well, not only do we know how to hurt them, but because of our deeper love for them, we feel that our perspectives are that much more important.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think the interesting I feel like there's a tonal shift between what we read last week and what we read this week, in the sense that I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before, but when I read the stuff from last week, like God feels like a very distant character in those stories. But here he's in it. He's talking to them, he's walking along with them. There's just a more personal, connected piece, I feel like, that was not present in the things that we read last week. Even when he interacted with people last week, it still felt very much like God's up here and they're down here. And here it doesn't feel it. I don't know. There's just a more personal connection there than I feel like was shown before.
Maybe after the fall, but before the fall, he was walking in the garden with them.
But just the way it's written, like,
yeah,
I don't know. It feels very like I mean, kind of like John was saying last week, like stories told by the campfire. I mean, these kind of like old ancient tales, right? Whereas this actually kind of feels more like a, I don't know, a modern adventure novel or something. I mean, there's a little bit more, I don't know, relatability to it, even
Well,
though,
there's
I
a
mean,
lot more dynamics because there are a lot more characters too.
well, that's true too.
Yeah, no, but it is getting more personal, and I think we'll see more of that even as we continue on, into the Exodus. Remember that really a lot of what we're reading is, the precursor, of course, to the Exodus, because now we know how God's people got to Egypt, right? In the story of Joseph, and so on.
Yeah, the story with Joseph, once he is ruling over Egypt, doesn't make him out to be a very nice person. He has the people with selling everything that they own, selling themselves into slavery, just to have a little bit of grain that he's managed to store up for the Pharaoh.
Good point.
Of course, dealing with Pharaoh and his crew may not have been very easy situation to be in either. Sometimes we do drastic things when when there's a lot expected of us.
I'm reading a book about some of the things that are happening in Israel and Palestine today, and it references things from the past and ancient history and so on. But there are records that go way back of times of famine or drought, and in this case of drought, that there were people who would carry water, these great distances, and sell the water, of course, to people that that needed it, and made a ton of money in the process. You might imagine. So you think about life in a pretty unforgiving environment, and you can see how some of these things might take place. How about how incredibly faithful God is, to these promises, and it isn't about so much the faithfulness of the people. I mean, there are redeeming qualities, yes, but there's also these really terrible qualities as well, and yet God still, God's made a promise that are, God's going to carry through. That seems encouraging for our faith, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm always kind of bothered when somebody says, well, God of the Old Testament he was nasty, he was cruel and all this, and he changed in the New Testament. No, he didn't. He wasn't nasty and cruel. He was patient. His patience were really strained by the people, and he kept coming back and loving them. And it was the people that fell away and didn't mind him. And I just can't see that he was a different God in the Old Testament than in the New Testament.
I was to that point. I was just thinking that God has always been a God of choosing, but the relationship of that choosing has changed in the New Testament because of the blood of Christ.
Mhm.
We can know God's love. We can know God. We can be His children. Well, no, they were children in the Old Testament, but the tenor of the relationship has changed because of Christ's intercession for us. Whereas in the Old Testament, there was a relationship and He chose people to do stuff, but they didn't. I just don't feel like they were privy to the same direct connection that we can enjoy.
Or else they
Although
failed in it.
Yeah, but the choosing is the same though. God chose them. It's just
Yeah.
we didn't have the intercession that we do. They didn't have the intercession that we do now.
Well, the New Testament is very, if the New Testament continued in some way like a historical document, like the Old Testament tends to trend, there would have been a lot of things included that would have colored how things looked there too, because the church has made some really bad decisions over the, hundreds of thousands of years. So if that had been included as you keep going and you hit things like the Crusades, and I mean, there's a bunch of million things that the church has done that has been terrible, it might have made the relationship with the church and God look very different in that time, just like the Old Testament. So the New Testament is kind of, here's the word, take it forward, and then just leave it there. So it doesn't really pull the history in the same way that the Old Testament does.
I like the fact that it portrays, these patriarchs and matriarchs in all of their glory and their faults and waywardness and everything. It's kind of laid out there. We've got about 10 minutes to go. I want to see if there's any sharing from the reflection page. We've talked a little bit about maybe that first question, reflecting on God's faithfulness, like with Abraham. What does it tell you about God's relationship to you? What does it evoke from you in your relationship to God? Anyone answer that? Anyone want to share? You don't have to, but
I would say it just builds on my ability to trust in God. His faithfulness is unquestionable, and it's been proven all down through the ages. And the fact that I know that he does not change gives me every reason to believe it's not going to change with me either.
Good.
Well, I feel my side of the covenant is to keep my communication active with God. And I'm to live by his standards established, through the patriarchs. So, and if I chose not to do that, that's my loss. Because he's there, he's willing.
How about the second question? Anyone, can someone read that? Page 37. How about Tom McCullough? Are you on page 37, question number 2, reflections? Would you mind reading that?
You're talking about number 1?
Number 2.
Okay. Let's see. Joseph believed all that had happened to him was God's plan to rescue his family from starvation in Canaan. By arranging for the people of Israel to survive in Egypt, God was faithful to the promise. Think of times in your life when you have recognized that God had been at work bringing something good out of something that first seemed bad. What have you discovered through that experience?
Anyone have an example of that? Good coming from bad that they would like to share?
Personally, when I was working in Pakistan, I was thinking that I would be there until I'd retire. But then 9/11 took place, and that changed my view. And I think it was for the better. I'm still struggling to figure out why it's better, but I think my life is different. I still have relationships with people in Pakistan, but I'm glad I'm at a distance.
Good. Any other examples?
Well, just the ordeals we've been through with our daughter have certainly been challenging and in some cases seemingly overwhelming, but at the same time, we saw things that really concerned us in regards to Jenna, but due to the events in her life, her trajectory was shifted and definitely influenced by those events and things that came about because of those events. So it started long before even her suicide attempt, where she had a lot of addiction issues and so forth, where her life was actually threatened on numerous occasions. And actually the suicide attempt that put her in the hospital, that was actually number 13 that we know of. She had numerous occasions where we could have lost her. But yet God's hand was in it and carried her through it, and has brought her to a point now where, she counts on him daily,
Yeah.
So that's all good. And it's taught us a lot as far as how to accept others, and understand that everybody has challenges, and that those challenges almost always influence their choices and their behaviors. So all we can do is try to encourage them and point toward God as we do.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. I think looking at our time, I want to see if there are any prayer requests. And again, we're going to be off until November, that first Wednesday in November. Any prayers? I'd appreciate prayers to travel mercies, for our trip and the 20-some people that are all going, and prayers for we have Presbytery tomorrow, and I'll be co-moderating the first in-person Presbytery meeting in 3 years. So looking forward to that. A little nervous about that too. So we'll see Tom over there tomorrow.
Is that in Everett or
in Edmonds? Yeah.
Edmonds. Oh, okay.
And Wayne.
And Wayne too. Yes. Yep. Sorry, Wayne. Yep.
Is your friend Dave able to go to Israel?
He is. Yeah.
Oh, good.
And I'll just share real quick too that I was talking to him and I said, you could contact the airlines and see if they can do something for you because of your back and stuff, as far as a better seat. Because he's like 6'2". He's big. He's a big guy, and he's like, no, whatever. Well, I was mentioning that to Rita and Lauren yesterday, and Rita's like, why don't you just call him? Call the airlines and say, it's your friend, you're traveling with him, and because I have to carry his bags because he can't carry anything over 10 pounds. Anyway, so I was like, can't hurt. So I called and I just explained, I said, friend of mine, and went through the whole deal, and she was able to pull up his reservation, and she's like, oh yeah, we can do that. So moved him up into some seats that are going to be better for him for the trip. And so
Good.
Great.
really looking forward to that. And I'll have more stories to share about that as well. But yeah, thanks. I appreciate those prayers. There's an exercise in the next lesson that has to do with kind of a more creative sense, of taking a scene from the Exodus and maybe writing a little screenplay for it, or doing some sort of artistic endeavor. And so I invite you to think ahead, at least kind of plant the seed. So you're, if your study time happens right before we meet, or after for that matter, you can think through ahead enough, and maybe that would be something you would share. We'll have opportunity that people could share theirs. So be thinking about that ahead of time. Anyone volunteer to close us in prayer?
Well, just one
Can
other.
I add one more? Can I add one more prayer request?
Sure.
It's for my eldest sister. She and her husband are on the train heading to Washington, D.C., where her son, daughter-in-law, and their only grandchild lives. And my sister experiences phobia of travel, and just that God will be with them in a very special way on the train, coming and going, and really bringing her calm and the assurance of his presence.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Wouldn't like something like air travel be less traumatic over time? Or
No,
maybe
she
not?
can't get on an airplane. She
Oh, well,
she
there you
won't get
go.
on an airplane.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And Jim, did you?
Well, just a couple things. Chris's youngest brother is, I think I mentioned it before. He's at end of life. He's had a life of addiction as well, and is unable to do anything for himself. We just found out, I believe it was yesterday, that he did get into a veterans facility where he was going to get taken care of.
Oh, okay.
But there's a Thanksgiving in the midst of all that.
Yeah.
Hopefully by the time you get back from your trip, Chris and I will be moving into our new place. And so I've been over there painting and doing all kinds of stuff, but there's still two guys living in the house. So I have to kind of be careful about what all we're doing over there.
Yeah.
But it's coming together and we're excited. And so we're just really looking forward to that. And so may come to the point where we need some help, and I'll make that known when the time's here.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for prayers surrounding Eric's birthday. So I had it was a good time. Hard, but it was good. And I'm having a little bit of peace with things that were going on with Paul. Not that they are resolved, but I just have a little bit more peace about it. So thank you all.
Oh, thanks, Carrie. Hey, Rosalie, can I call on you? Kind of a prayer warrior. Can I call on you to close us in prayer? Would you mind?
It's not reading a written one. It's
just
from the heart. Okay.
Yeah.
Lord Jesus, we thank you for the opportunity to really dig deep and learn and understand what happened through the ages and the continuity of it and the brokenness of we human beings. And yet we are loved by our Heavenly Father. We thank you for the opportunity of feeling free to meet this way and talk and question. And you bless us, and I thank you, Lord. And now be with each one in their individual upcoming activities, and Matt's travels, and Jim's moving, and we can each feel your presence, and I thank you so much, Lord. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.